Hello, welcome to the X Factor podcast. I'm your host, Charles Epstein. Joining me today is Genevieve Bortuski, a licensed psychologist who brings a unique perspective to the intersection of psychology, privacy, and AI governance. In her private practice, she focuses on clinical work addressing severe and persistent mental illness, as well as family and relationship dynamics. Her work integrates an understanding of how digital environments shape psychological well-being, including issues related to privacy, cyberstalking, and online harm. Beyond clinical practice, Genevieve leads a boutique consulting firm that applies behavioral science to privacy compliance and AI governance. Her approach helps organizations navigate ethical AI development, data protection challenges, and the broader impact of technology on human behavior and organizational culture. Genevieve, hey, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, delighted that you're able to make the time, given all the things that you do. I know you are calling in and speaking to me from Virginia. Where exactly?
hmm So I'm in the far southwest corner of Virginia, so right around where Tennessee, North Carolina meet Virginia. So I'm way up in the mountains.
Ah, I see. Now, if I were to visit, where would I have to, what would I have to see? What's the one place you'd have to take me to?
About 2 hours away, I would probably take you to Dollywood.
Oh, oh, wow. I'd love to go to Dollywood.
Yeah, I
Is
love
it,
Dollywood.
you've been multiple times with the family?
Oh yeah. And I used to go
Um,
as a kid.
how long has that been up? It's been up easily over 20 years, right?
I don't want to give away my age, but it's been there at least 30 to 40 years that I know of, maybe even longer.
Really? Wow. No, like most people, I'm a big Dolly fan, and it just sounds like a really cool place to be in. Obviously, RAP to her longtime
hmm
hubby. What's his name? Carl Dean?
Yes, Carl Dean.
Yeah, we could easily turn this into the Dolly podcast, Genevieve.
Oh yeah, and talk about like how she's built up Gatlinburg. It's so different from when I was a kid when I go
Oh, is
out
that
there
so?
now.
I could imagine. I could
hmm
imagine that for all intents and purposes is Dollywood, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the whole city's just grown up around what she's put there. That's pretty amazing.
Amazing. No,
hmm
no, no. She's just an immensely impressive, human being going back to some of the interviews. There's one
hmm
classic interview she gave with a hostile Barbara Walters, and she just always handles herself with such grace, patience, and intelligence, and
She
wit,
does.
and
hmm
wit,
hmm
you know. Anyway, kudos to Dolly. Sorry, everybody, for that digression, but we know Genevieve how popular she is, so I can't
hmm
imagine too many people object. Again, really do appreciate it. Speaking of digressions, or
hmm
people with multiple parts, I mentioned psychology, technology as components of your professional background. I didn't
hmm
mention in your intro that you also have an MBA, so it is not an
hmm
overstatement when I say that you bring a unique perspective to this work. So let me back up a second.
hmm
You got your BA, Master's, and PsyD. Do I pronounce that
hmm
right? PsyD?
Yep.
PsyD
hmm
in clinical forensic psychology, which begs the inevitable
hmm
question, what exactly is clinical forensic psychology?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. In its simplest terms, it's the application of psychology to the law. And so, as a clinical forensic psychologist, I did, even in some practice now, but what I would do is I would not just treat severe and persistent mental disorders, whether it was in prison or in state hospital. I also dealt with a lot of legal cases. And so, as a forensic side of it, is I would use psychology to answer legal questions. And so, I would do expert witness testimony around not guilty by reason of insanity assessments, competency, civil commitments, things like that.
Okay, very, very law and order. I'm surprised. I'm sure if I were a fan, I would have come across more than one clinical forensic psychologist. Which leads me to ask, how does a psychologist end up in privacy and AI governance consulting? How does that
Mm-hmm.
happen?
That is probably the question I get asked the most.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so I've always been interested in forensics and the law, and for a long time I debated whether or not I wanted to study law or if I wanted to continue with psychology. So when I decided to go back for my doctorate, I ended up getting it in clinical forensic psychology. And then when I graduated, I worked for the prison system out in Oklahoma. And I was working in Supermax, death row. And while I was there, the way my brain works, I'm also very interested in communications and persuasion. So I was on the crisis negotiation team, which is commonly referred to as a hostage negotiation team. And after a few years there, I see your face like,
Wow.
wow. Yeah.
Yes. Those are pretty gritty environments. Gee whiz. Yeah.
Yeah. I loved it though. I mean, the prison's difficult to work in, especially after 3.5 years there. I knew I didn't want my career to stay in prison. So when I got the job out here,
Is it because the nature of the population, the nature of the interactions, the institution itself, the confines of the system, all of the
a lot
above?
of it's, yeah, all of the above. The biggest stressors are the confines of the system because the majority of people in prison do have a severe and persistent mental illness. And if they don't have one before they go in, they usually get one while they're there.
Sure.
So that's really difficult to deal with. And I had the worst of the worst. That's not a very clinically appropriate way to say it, but I was dealing with they had the highest level of security in Oklahoma and death row. And most of them were actually quite pleasant to work with, believe it or
Hmm.
not. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. By the
Yeah.
way, I don't want to yada 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 past your hostage negotiation
Mm-hmm.
phase. What did that involve?
So I was appointed to they call it crisis negotiation now, but it was always known as hostage negotiation for a while. But I was appointed as part of the Department of Corrections team, and it was made up of people from all over from the different prisons within Oklahoma. And my job on the team, so I was trained to negotiate, be the coach on the negotiation team, as well as kind of the psychologist, mental health person who was always looking at what was going on as well from more of a behavioral science standpoint. And that was really interesting. I mean, most crisis negotiations are not what you see on TV. It's a whole team going in, and a lot of
So
them
it's
are
not you
resolved.
going rogue. You can't give us any examples of Genevieve going rogue. I've
Yeah,
got this.
right.
Scooting
It,
up a building. No?
exactly. It's none of that. It's a lot of it would actually probably not make very good TV because it's a lot of sitting around and listening.
Mm.
And and that's the biggest part of negotiation is just being able to listen to somebody and to understand where they're coming from. And because I can't help somebody, I can't make a change, I can't influence behavior or negotiate cooperation if I don't understand where they're coming from.
Right. By the
And
way, I think there are some great comic possibilities in marrying
mhm.
Waiting for Godot and Crisis Negotiation. You know, I
Mhm.
don't know exactly how that would work, but it seems to me it's a really
Mhm.
good high concept, a lot of comedic possibilities. What I really want to talk to you about is quote unquote how digital environments
Mhm.
shape psychological well-being. Because I think when we first spoke, we actually spoke about that, how there seems to be a
Mhm.
confluence of forces and factors that are bearing down on today's workforce
Mhm.
as never before. So, if you would speak to that.
Oh gosh, where do I start with that?
I know,
Um,
I know.
it's I think the biggest thing to start with is that AI is just everywhere now.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a buzzword. It's things are coming like new platforms are coming out all the time. There's a big investment into AI. If you look what's going on in the EU, even over here, they've talked about investing more into AI. Everything is getting it, and so in terms of work, I'm seeing a lot of fear, like fear around job displacement. Like, what's going to happen? Is AI going to replace my job? I'm also seeing bias in hiring because AI is inherently biased. Like, that's the other thing, too, is that AI is learning from us. It's learning from the information that we put out there. Like ChatGPT learns by scraping the internet. So any of the information that's biased, there's a lot of that that people put into the systems.
Right,
And
right.
so that's a big concern that I have.
Sure.
I'm also seeing that there's also
But
big
by the way, I
lack
just want
of
to interject
culture.
because I have a very good visual to really capture that idea. Where I live, Boca Raton is
Mm-hmm,
very much a tennis community. So I'd always see this guy for weeks and weeks and weeks hitting against a ball machine. He had awful technique, but he
mm-hmm,
was really persistent. Every morning he'd be out there, and somebody said, "Oh, gee, he must be really getting better. I said, no, he's just grooving bad technique. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's sort of the same
Mhm.
here. You're just feeding in information that's already biased, so it's going to
Yes.
produce more of the same.
Hmm. Exactly. And when I was doing my dissertation and learning, psychological research, the thing that was drilled into our heads was garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
So and there is a lack of transparency on how a lot of these AI systems are learning. And so, like, what information's going in there? Like, how is it learning? Who's putting it in? So there is, that also leads to an inherent lack of trust. The other thing that I'm kind of concerned about too, and I was attending a conference. I was educated overseas as well, so I got my master's there. He said, one of the things that I'm concerned about too, and he hit the nail on the head. He said AI should not be making decisions because it cannot be held accountable. It's a machine,
Right.
and yeah. And so one of my things that I'm worried about personally, I do see other people worried about this as well, is are we just going to start letting AI make decisions for us and just roll with it?
Exactly. Who do you usually interact with at the organizational level? IT, HR, operations, who do you most
Mm-hmm.
often? It could be all of the above. I'm curious.
Yeah, it is. It is really all of the above. It depends on what they're reaching out for. So I've had tech founders reach out who want to build like privacy and AI governance like right into what they're building. And so that's really great because I get to talk to the founders, I get to talk to the engineers and really troubleshoot like how do we build this into the system so that we're not trying to retroactively fit it in later. Because that actually costs more money. So it's better to stick it in at the beginning, you know, look at where the technology is going, where the governance is going, especially like the EU Act for AI governance over there, and just build it right into the product. And so I love doing that. That's a lot of fun. Other times I do work with just leaders within an organization, looking at how they're going to implement like AI policy in their organizations. I do recommend creating like an AI governance team within an organization, depending on how big the organization is, with representatives from each department. And I get a lot of reach out from clinicians as well, especially being a psychologist who has this knowledge, because now we're seeing this massive influx of therapy bots coming out on and like
Yes.
wellness apps. So
Yeah.
I,
Now we had a very, very interesting conversation about
mm,
that. And you brought up a point, and I can't tell you how many conversations I had about so-called therapy bots. And I never really discussed really a glaring thing that's really hiding in plain sight. What you brought up
mhm,
is that there is no mechanism, as far as you know, as far as I know,
mhm,
where somebody is expressing suicidal ideation, whereas a human counselor,
mhm,
you're obligated to alert
mhm,
parents, whomever. How do you do that with a
yeah.
therapy bot? Is that being done with a therapy bot? And if not, isn't that sort of a fatal problem?
I would say it's a fatal problem. And I can't speak for every therapy AI platform out there because I have not reviewed all of them. I will say, and I'm happy to, if somebody's like, hey, no, we're actually doing this, I would love to hear from you. But yeah, there's a lot of things I'm not seeing. So in the United States, every state has their own mental health laws, and they set the criteria for involuntary commitment or involuntary evaluations. And typically, you're going to have like three main things. You're going to have a danger to self, which is usually like the suicidal ideation. A lot of them have an extra step in it that's, there's an act in furtherance, which means you're likely to carry it out. Danger to others due to a mental illness or inability to care for self, which might be somebody who's not eating because they think all the food is poisoned. And the therapy bots, none of the ones that I've seen have been able to screen for that. And even if they do pick it up, who do they let know?
Right.
Like, who do they call? Do they call the crisis center? Does it trigger something? Like, nobody's really been able to answer that question. So that's one of the big glaring errors. The other two glaring errors that I see is that therapists, psychologists, teachers, we're all mandated reporters. So if we hear this is where confidentiality goes out the window. If I hear, one of my clients tell me that that there's child abuse somewhere or elder abuse, I have to report that. I am a mandated reporter. Otherwise, I could lose my license. I could, all sorts of things could happen. I could get sued. Again, AI doesn't have that. And if they do, how does that work? And then the final one, and this one can be really deadly, is the Tarasoff warning. So this was a Supreme Court case. Oh goodness, I can't remember, 30, 40 years ago, where therapists, medical providers, we all have a duty to warn. So if I'm doing therapy with somebody and they say, hey, I'm going to kill my girlfriend, I have a duty to warn her. I have a duty to call her if I have her information, to call the police and to take reasonable steps to protect her. AI doesn't have any of that built in. And so those are like three main things I've not even really seen being considered much in these discussions around these therapy bots that are coming out all the time.
There are several other things you put your finger on as being concerns when we spoke. I'm sure if we spoke any longer than we did, it would be many more than those things.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about lack of transparency, the problem of
Mm-hmm.
shadow AI, shadow IT
Mm-hmm.
has been long a problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you could speak to some of those things.
Sure. So for you guys out there that don't know what shadow AI is, it's essentially using AI that's not authorized by the company. Usually it's Chat GPT or one of the other big three in there. And the thing is, when you put something into like an open AI, like Chat GPT or Gemini, that's going to they're going to use that information to train the AI. So people have been inadvertently giving away client information, proprietary information, and putting it into the system, and the AI is learning from that. So that can actually end up causing an organization a huge headache and
Sure.
loss of money too. And they can get sued for privacy violations for their customers, things like
So
that.
how do you address that? How do you preempt that?
Yeah, well, when I work with organizations, I recommend a lot of education for their employees. That's one big thing. I mean, that's the obvious one. Like teach the employees, like, hey, don't use Chat GPT and put your patient information in there or client information. Like, just don't
Right.
do that.
Right.
But the other thing too is look at the why. Why are people using shadow AI in an organization? Like, if you have an issue with this in your organization, why is that? Do people have too much on their plates? Do they feel like they can't say like, hey, I'm overwhelmed or this is too much? And address that issue. Like if there is too much on somebody's plate or something can be streamlined.
Question I wanted to ask you, to kind of getting at it, which is how you apply behavioral health to privacy, compliance, and
Mm-hmm.
AI governance.
Exactly. Like look at, if you have an issue with something, why is that an issue? Where is it stemming from? Is there a problem within the organization on how things are run or within the culture? Like just take a look at that stuff. And I also think of it too when I think about when I worked in a prison. Like security is on our minds all the time. Like the way you walk, the way, what you do, people are reminding you, like if you forget something, they're like, hey, make sure you do this. So then I also think about how do you make that a priority in your organization so that people are thinking about it all the time? Because the largest privacy breaches, usually it's somebody sitting behind a computer
Right.
accidentally doing something,
Right.
and
Right.
usually not consciously. They're not trying to mess up the company. They just do something, they make a mistake, and it happens. So if you can have people aware of that, thinking about it, make it part of the culture, and also have where, hey, I messed up, and be able to come to your boss and say, hey, I messed up, and your boss not be like, oh well, we're going to put you in timeout or fire you. To be like,
Right.
let's fix it. Like, okay, let's not worry about the blame right now. It's the same thing I do with my kid. Like, he messes something up, we fix the issue first before we worry about anything else. It's that same idea of just having that, they call it psychological safety, to be able to be like, hey, I messed up, but let's try to fix it, and then maybe we can learn from this mistake.
You mentioned there was one question you get asked the most. Again, how all the moving
Mm-hmm.
parts that make you you come
Yeah.
together. So I'm going to sort of ask you a version of that. What's the
Mm-hmm.
other thing people ask you, particularly people coming to you, ask you about AI governance and some of these issues we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about? What are the one or two other things that people want to know?
Yeah, I get asked a lot, and I'm probably sure a lot of people in AI governance get asked this too. So it's not just because I'm a psychologist. Is Do you find that guardrails hinder innovation in the field?
Ah,
And I get that so much. And I don't think it's an easy yes or no answer. But, being a psychologist, being a behavioral scientist, I look at patterns. And if you look back at like the crash of 20 of two, and this is a very oversimplified version of this. This is not, not an economist, but if you look back at like 2008 and 2000 or 1929, when we had the stock market crash, one of the things that both of those had in common was the deregulation and overproduction. And so, people like, oh, well, we need the innovation and we need to do this. But the thing with deregulation is there's always going to be a bust at the end of it. If you go too fast, if you overproduce. So, and then people end up getting hurt. So I think it's really important to have those guardrails in place to make sure that if it does come to the point where it does burst or something like that, like people are still protected.
right. Right. By the way, my answer to that question, do guardrails sort of put restraints or constrain
Mm-hmm.
innovation? I'd argue the reverse. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
know I myself know with guardrails, if you also want to use constraints, sort of synonymous
Mm-hmm.
with it, to me, it sort of goes back to the old, I mentioned this when we first spoke, the old Robert Frost line that free versus playing
Mm-hmm.
tennis without a net, which is to say having structure is a good thing. It
Mm-hmm.
forces discipline. And I could cite any number of examples through history of great art
Mm-hmm.
being done within constraints. Probably the foremost
Mm-hmm.
example is the Sistine Chapel. Try doing anything on your back, let
Yeah.
alone doing what he
Yeah.
did,
Yeah.
So, and if I'm, a leader of an organization, I throw that down as a challenge. I
Mm-hmm.
say, look, we all have to operate within constraints, but that's often what
Mm-hmm.
produces great art, that produces great work,
Mm-hmm.
that produces innovation. How do I get something that does as much in a smaller space,
Mm-hmm.
right? A smaller form factor,
Mm-hmm.
it's all that. Anyway, but we digress.
No, I
Um,
completely agree with you on that. And I think it makes you more creative too, because you have to problem solve a lot.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So, and I'm a big fan of free jazz, by the way, but at a point,
Mhm. Yeah.
late stage Coltrane is hard to listen to, and I
Mhm.
love Coltrane. Anyway, we have this new segment that is probably the polar opposite of shadow AI.
Mhm.
We call it we call it bag check, and I ask
Mhm.
guests what's in your bag, what are your go-to AI
Mhm.
tools to the extent that you feel at liberty to reveal such
Mhm.
trade secrets,
Sure.
Genevieve?
Um, yeah, absolutely. So right now, so in addition to having my own consulting, I also work for a private practice, and we're actually using a new AI tool right now, not for the clinical stuff. Let me specify that we are very clear on the clinical stuff. We're really careful about any of that. But we're right now looking at like we're sampling ClickUp as a project management software because we want to grow the practice and grow the consulting side of the practice. And so ClickUp has some AI in there that we've been playing with. And again, for not related to the patients, we're very clear on that. And one of the reasons that we like ClickUp so far is their privacy practices and their privacy compliance. And we asked the sales rep a lot of questions about how they train their AI and how that learns.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, excellent. Anything else as you dig deeper into the bag that you're using?
uh
Or kicking
not
the
in real
tires on, or
Yeah.
thinking of kicking the tires on?
Well, not so much in terms of AI, but I think one of the best things that I have in my bag is is completely outside of technology, and it's like really good colleagues and friends um who know who know things I don't know. And I
Yes.
think that's the fantastic part of it is even the psychologists I work with, they have different expertise than I do, and they know things that I don't know. So it's always good to surround yourself with people who know things you don't and who are even smarter than you if you can.
Yeah, as hard as they may be to find. Yes, no, totally understand that. No, no, I kid. But no, it's interesting because people assume
Hmm.
AI exchange is all about AI. And I say, well, no,
Hmm.
there's a subtle difference because or something else going on, which is to say it's about successfully navigating the world of AI
Mm-hmm.
augmented work. It doesn't necessarily have to be AI, but this is the
Mm-hmm.
world we're in, and how does that
Yeah.
help you through a world dominated by this new
Mm-hmm.
technology? So anyway, anything else you'd like to add? You want to look into your crystal ball? What's looming? What we should be mindful of? Anything?
Ah, be mindful of your privacy and how much information you're giving to AI. I think that's really important. And also be mindful of your attention, where you're putting it. So, and it's okay to shut down. It is okay to turn everything off and, you know, give yourself time away from disconnect away from the computer and kind of refocus yourself.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Genevieve, I really do appreciate this. I was looking forward to this conversation. And, we choose our words very carefully here on the AIX Factor. So when I say you bring a unique perspective to the intersection of psychology, privacy, and AI governance, you do exactly that. And anybody who's made it to this point in the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, that should have been by now abundantly clear, Genevieve. Anyway, really
Yes,
do appreciate
yes.
you spending time
Thank,
with me.
thank you. Oh, one more thing. I would love
Yes.
to see more behavioral scientists, psychologists, humanities, communications get involved in these conversations because AI hits. Of
We're
course, I always
at,
have the last minute thought. Yeah, AI hits so many different areas that I think it's important to have these different
yeah.
perspectives and to look at it from different points of view.
Yeah, no, I think you'll be happy to know that I have a binder full of such people.
Good.
And I will be bringing them on because, I do have a lot of conversation. I do another podcast,
Mm-hmm.
behavioral psychologists and people who do that kind of work. And there
Mm-hmm.
is very much a symbiosis of coming together, particularly these days with
Mm-hmm.
technology, all the things we're talking about. So I definitely want to have more of those conversations. Anyway, Genevieve, thanks so much. Do appreciate. I'm gonna have you on again, by the way.
I appreciate that. I'll be happy to do it. Just let me know when.
Absolutely. Anyway, today I
It's
spoke
fine.
with Genevieve Bortusky, a
Mm-hmm.
licensed psychologist who brings, as I said, and this will be for the third time, who brings a unique perspective to the intersection of psychology, privacy, and AI governance. This is Charles Epstein for the X Factor podcast. Thanks for listening.